In the annals of history, the chronicles of war are often heavy with sorrow, sacrifice, and the complexity of human conflict. Battles are fought for land, for resources, for sovereignty, or ideology. Yet among these tales, one stands out, not for its body count or geopolitical consequence, but for its surreal nature, the Emu War of 1932. It was a war in the most unconventional sense. Australian soldiers armed with machine guns went to battle against large, flightless birds. At first glance, it may seem a trivial or even comical affair. However, underneath the feathered absurdity lies a tale of economic hardship, governmental overreach, and the struggle of farmers fighting nature itself. The Emu War is more than a quirky footnote in military history. It is a lens through which we can examine the effects of environmental imbalance, poor agricultural planning, and the unintended consequences of mechanized might. This essay will trace the full history of the Emu War, from the post-World War I economic depression and soldier resettlement schemes, through the deployment of military forces, to the birds' victorious resistance and the long-term consequences for policy and public perception. What began as a desperate cry from struggling farmers for assistance ultimately became an infamous symbol of governmental miscalculation and the humbling power of nature. The roots of the Emu War lie not in 1932, but much earlier, in the turbulent years following the First World War. Australia, like many nations, emerged from the Great War battered and bruised. Though geographically distant from the main theatres of war, its involvement was intense. Over 400,000 Australians enlisted, and around 60,000 lost their lives. The survivors returned home with trauma, injuries, and the hope that their sacrifice would be honoured with a better life. The Australian government, keen to reward its returning soldiers and repopulate rural areas, implemented the Soldier Settlement Scheme. This was a policy designed to allocate parcels of farmland, particularly in Western Australia and other rural states, to veterans, with the expectation that they would become self-sufficient agricultural producers. In principle, the scheme was noble. In practice, it was deeply flawed. Many soldiers were given arid, infertile land far from towns and infrastructure. Others lacked the agricultural experience to manage a farm effectively. The government provided financial assistance, but this was often insufficient, and bureaucratic hurdles prevented timely access to essential resources. Many farms failed. Still, some succeeded, particularly in regions like Western Australia's Campion district. Wheat became the primary crop of choice, encouraged by government subsidies and wartime food demand. Yet by the late 1920s and early 1930s, the global economic tide had turned. The 1930s were marked by the worldwide Great Depression, a cataclysmic economic downturn that devastated industries, erased jobs, and shattered communities. For Australian farmers, already struggling with drought and poor soil quality, the collapse of wheat prices was devastating. Wheat prices fell to levels that made production barely sustainable, and the promised government subsidies were either delayed or insufficient. Tensions rose between farmers and the government. Protest movements flared across the country. It was in this volatile atmosphere, economic desperation, political unrest, and failed promises, that a new threat began to emerge. Not from politicians, not from foreign invaders, but from within the natural world itself. In late 1932, the farmers of Western Australia found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had seen before, the emu. Emus are native to Australia and are the second largest birds in the world by height, surpassed only by the ostrich. They are flightless, fast, and known for their erratic behavior. Each year, these birds engage in migratory movements from inland areas to more fertile, coastal regions in search of food and water. In the spring of 1932, an estimated 20,000 emus made their way from arid inland Australia to the farming districts of Campion and Walgolan in Western Australia. Driven by instinct and hunger, they descended upon the wheat fields like a force of nature. The birds trampled fences, devoured crops, and disturbed livestock. Their powerful legs crushed the fragile wheat plants. Worse, they often broke down fencing, allowing other pests, such as rabbits, to infiltrate protected farmland. The farmers, already pushed to the brink by economic ruin, saw their lifeline destroyed before their eyes. Emus were not just eating their crops, they were destroying their future. The scale of the damage was immense. Farmers attempted to drive them off using vehicles, dogs, and rifles, but the birds were fast and agile. Emus would scatter and regroup, often outpacing or outmaneuvering human attempts to herd or shoot them. The local governments were overwhelmed. The problem quickly escalated beyond local containment. Facing mounting losses and no help in sight, the farmers turned to a most unlikely source, the Australian military. Frustrated and desperate, a delegation of farmers approached Sir George Pearce, then the Minister of Defence. Their request: military assistance to deal with the emu infestation. It seemed ludicrous, but the logic was oddly compelling. The government had modern weapons, trained personnel, and a political obligation to support its returned soldiers now turned farmers. Sir George Pearce was sympathetic. He also saw a political opportunity. A show of federal intervention could boost morale and support among the struggling rural electorate. Furthermore, this was the era of mechanized warfare. Why not test the capabilities of modern weapons against a novel foe? The request was approved. On November 2, 1932, a contingent of soldiers from the Royal Australian Artillery, led by Major G.P.W. Meredith, was deployed to Campion. Their weapons: 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Their mission: eliminate the emu threat. What would later be known as the Emu War officially began in early November 1932. Meredith and his team expected quick success. How hard could it be to shoot a few birds? Reality quickly shattered expectations. The emus proved to be elusive and remarkably resilient. In their first major engagement, the soldiers located around 50 birds. However, the emus scattered in all directions upon hearing the gunfire. Only a handful were hit. The soldiers soon realized that emus did not behave like traditional battlefield targets. They did not mass in one place, and they could sprint at speeds up to 50 km per hour, 31 miles per hour, zigzagging through fields and brush. Meredith attempted various tactics: ambushes, mobile attacks using trucks, and flank maneuvers. None were effective. The trucks could not match the emu's agility on rough terrain, and the birds simply dispersed whenever approached. One infamous report noted that a soldier rode in the back of a truck with a machine gun while chasing emus across a field. The terrain proved so rough that the gunner could not aim properly. The chase ended with the vehicle damaged and the emus escaping unharmed. The birds had, in effect, adapted to guerrilla tactics. In the first week, despite firing hundreds of rounds, fewer than 200 emus were confirmed killed. Many were only wounded, disappearing into the bush to die later or perhaps even recover. News of the Emu War quickly spread across Australia, and then the world. The press had a field day with the story. Headlines ranging from "Emus defy Australian Army" to "Machine guns no match for birds" ridiculed the operation. Cartoons depicted emus in military uniforms, outsmarting hapless soldiers. International newspapers picked up the story, further embarrassing the Australian government. Although the operation had a serious goal, protecting livelihoods and food supplies, it appeared to be an absurd spectacle. Public opinion became divided. Some saw it as a noble effort gone wrong, while others viewed it as a ridiculous misuse of military resources. Faced with mounting criticism and poor results, the government began to reconsider the operation. By mid-November, it was clear that the emus were winning. Major Meredith, while professional and diligent, admitted that the operation was not achieving its objectives. The birds were simply too fast, too scattered, and too unpredictable to be controlled by military means alone. On December 10, 1932, after just over a month of intermittent campaigning, the Emu War was officially called off. The soldiers withdrew. The emus remained. As the Emu War drew to its unspectacular close in December 1932, Major G.P.W. Meredith filed his final reports with the Department of Defense. His findings were both candid and humbling. According to his estimates, approximately 986 emus had been killed outright, with a further 2,500 believed to have been wounded. This came at the cost of over 9,800 rounds of ammunition, more than 10 rounds per confirmed kill. In military terms, this was a staggeringly inefficient operation. While the primary objective had been to mitigate the damage caused by emus to wheat crops, the birds remained largely unimpeded. The emus had adapted quickly, formed evasive groups, and outmaneuvered soldiers on rugged terrain. Meredith reportedly remarked that if the emus had been soldiers, they would have been considered among the most formidable in the world. His final conclusion, though respectful and duty-bound, pointed to an embarrassing truth: the military was not equipped to fight birds. After the military's withdrawal, control of the emu situation reverted to local and state authorities. Farmers were left to their own devices, armed only with rifles, determination, and makeshift fences. Many returned to traditional hunting and culling methods, but the emu problem persisted, if not in full force, then certainly in spirit. The birds, undeterred by machine guns, continued their seasonal migrations, sometimes shifting to other vulnerable areas. For the Australian government, the experiment had been a political and tactical blunder. Although intentions were rooted in empathy for struggling rural populations, the operation had been executed without a thorough understanding of the ecological and logistical complexities involved. At the heart of this conflict lies a deeper biological and ecological misunderstanding. Emus are not merely pests or nuisances. They are integral components of Australia's ecosystem. As nomadic foragers, emus help disperse seeds across vast distances, contributing to plant regeneration and the health of native flora. Their seasonal migrations are an ancient rhythm, one that predates the arrival of European settlers by tens of thousands of years. In the eyes of Aboriginal Australians, emus are sacred beings. They feature prominently in Dreamtime stories and Indigenous art. To them, the emu is not a foe, but a teacher and guardian of balance. This clash between agricultural necessity and natural order lies at the heart of the Emu War. The wheat fields of Campion were human impositions on a landscape long governed by natural cycles. In that sense, the emus were not invaders but locals resisting the newcomers. After the war ended, the Emu War became an object of satire and ridicule. Newspapers lampooned the operation, cartoons flooded the public domain, and politicians dodged accountability through jokes and deflection. The phrase Emu War itself was originally tongue-in-cheek, never an official military designation, but it stuck. Over time, it entered the realm of legend. In schoolyards and pubs across Australia, the Emu War was whispered about as a strange, almost mythological tale. How could a modern army lose to birds? Were the stories even true? The incident became one of the most bizarre footnotes in military history, somewhere between the ridiculous and the sublime. Not everyone found it amusing. Members of the opposition criticized the operation as a gross misuse of military force and taxpayer money. They argued that it had exposed the government's lack of agricultural policy and long-term planning. Rather than arming soldiers, critics insisted, the government should have invested in better fencing, scientific research, and sustainable land management. While no formal inquiry was ever launched, the Emu War did inspire conversations around the role of the military in civil matters, particularly in areas like pest control, disaster response, and agricultural support. In this way, the war, absurd though it was, helped reshape how government agencies approached rural issues. In 1934, just 2 years after the first campaign, the emu problem flared up again. Farmers once more petitioned the government for military assistance. The memory of the Emu War still lingered, but desperation sometimes overrides reputation. After all, emus were still damaging crops, still costing livelihoods, and still seen as enemies of agriculture. However, this time the government declined. Instead, it opted for a subsidy program that paid farmers to hunt emus themselves. Bounties were offered per beak collected, incentivizing locals to take up arms, unofficially, against the emu menace. This was, in many ways, a quiet sequel to the Emu War, a decentralized, farmer-led campaign supported by financial rewards rather than firepower. It lacked the dramatic flair of soldiers and machine guns but proved to be more efficient in sheer numbers, with hundreds of thousands of emus reportedly culled in the years that followed. Over time, the Australian government established more structured pest management programs. Scientific studies into emu migration patterns, reproductive habits, and environmental needs helped inform policy. Fencing technology improved. Crop rotation and land rehabilitation programs were introduced. Eventually, the emu problem became manageable, not solved entirely, but better understood. The government recognized that coexistence, not eradication, was the more sustainable path forward. Strangely, the emu's public image evolved. Once cast as a destructive pest, the emu began to be reimagined as a symbol of resilience and independence. The same qualities that frustrated military planners, speed, intelligence, unpredictability, came to be admired. The emu is now one of Australia's national symbols. It appears on the national coat of arms, alongside the kangaroo, representing a forward-moving nation. Neither creature can walk backward, making them metaphors for progress. That the emu had once bested the military only added to its legendary status. Cartoonists, comedians, and artists embraced the Emu War as a quintessentially Australian story, one of overconfidence, irony, and humility. It was a reminder that nature does not always bow to machines, and that perhaps, in a land as ancient and untamed as Australia, humans must learn to adapt rather than dominate. The Emu War has inspired countless works of art, short stories, documentaries, and comedic sketches. Satirical reenactments have been staged by theater groups. Novels have woven it into their plotlines. Documentaries by the ABC and independent filmmakers have explored the event from various angles: military, environmental, and psychological. In recent years, internet culture has revived the Emu War as a meme-worthy moment of history. Social media posts joke about the only war Australia ever lost, or imagine a rematch of 2032. Yet behind the humor lies an enduring fascination. How could such a strange event happen? What does it say about us? The Emu War, though often viewed through a lens of absurdity, teaches a profound lesson about the human relationship with nature. Armed with all the might of industrial warfare, humans still could not subdue a species that had adapted perfectly to its environment. The emus were not strategists or saboteurs. They simply lived as they always had. It was the farmers and soldiers who had to change. This mismatch of intentions, humans trying to bend nature to their will, and nature quietly resisting, echoes across environmental policy to this day. Whether in managing wildfires, invasive species, or climate change, the Emu War reminds us that brute force is seldom the answer. One of the critical lessons of the Emu War was the importance of scientific and strategic planning. The operation failed not just because emus were hard to hit, but because little thought had been given to long-term containment strategies or environmental impact. In the years that followed, Australia began investing more in agricultural science, pest ecology, and rural infrastructure. Lessons from the Emu War informed how future conflicts with invasive species, such as rabbits, foxes, and cane toads, were approached. Coordinated campaigns involving biologists, local authorities, and landowners became the norm. Today, the Emu War is often taught in schools and universities, not just as an oddity of history, but as a case study in poor planning, miscommunication, and the unpredictable consequences of military involvement in civil affairs. It opens discussions on environmental ethics, civil-military relations, and the cultural importance of storytelling. Though no official monument marks the site of the Emu War, its memory lives on. In towns like Campion and Walgulin, local museums and tourism campaigns highlight their unique place in Australian history. Roadside signs, quirky exhibits, and historical plaques acknowledge what happened with equal parts pride and embarrassment. In 2019, a mock petition circulated online calling for a national Emu War Remembrance Day. Though satirical, it drew attention to the event's lasting cultural impact and sparked renewed interest in the subject among younger generations. The Emu War, when stripped of its irony and absurdity, offers a potent symbol of human presumption. A nation, with its industrial muscle and newly forged military identity, found itself confounded not by a foreign army or armed rebellion, but by birds. The absurd mismatch between intent and outcome serves as a metaphor for the overconfidence that often accompanies modernity's advance into the natural world. In an era marked by conquest and development, the Emu War stands as a warning: technological power does not guarantee control. Nature does not yield simply because one commands it to. And when humanity rushes forward without knowledge or respect, it risks defeat, even by something as unassuming as an emu. Strangely, in their supposed victory, the emus came to embody a uniquely Australian ethos: irreverent, tough, unyielding, and a bit unpredictable. Just as the kangaroo symbolized forward motion and adaptation, the emu, undaunted by bullets or bluster, became a kind of accidental hero. The Emu War reinforced this archetype of the underdog overcoming the odds, not through strategy, but through sheer grit and native resilience. The emu's defiance echoed the broader national identity forming in the 20th century, one shaped by hard land, skeptical of authority, and rich with dry humor. Though the Emu War is singular in its drama and specificity, it is not the only time humans have tried, and failed, to dominate the natural world with militaristic means. History is filled with similar misadventures. In China's For Pests campaign of the late 1950s, the government declared war on sparrows, among other animals, believing them to be responsible for grain loss. Citizens were ordered to kill sparrows en masse. The result was ecological disaster. The removal of sparrows led to locust swarms that devastated crops even further, contributing to the Great Chinese Famine. In the United States, the introduction of cane toads in Australia, to combat beetles in sugarcane fields, also serves as a cautionary tale. The toads became invasive, spreading rapidly and harming native wildlife, an example of ecological intervention gone awry. These examples, like the Emu War, underscore a consistent truth: ecosystems are complex. Intervening without deep understanding often does more harm than good. The Emu War also joins a smaller but notable list of times when military force was used inappropriately or ineffectively. It reflects what happens when the might of the state is applied where patience, science, or diplomacy might better serve. Comparable in absurdity is the British Pig War of 1859, in which a boundary dispute between the US and British Canada nearly escalated to armed conflict because an American farmer shot a British pig. Troops were deployed, but no shots were fired, save for the pig, and the matter was settled diplomatically. In these cases, the lesson remains: not every problem requires a uniformed response. Sometimes, power must bow to perspective. With the rise of the internet and global meme culture, the Emu War has found a second life online. What was once an obscure piece of Australian history has become international comic lore. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, and TikTok sketches abound with humorous dramatizations of the event, often portraying emus as tactical geniuses and soldiers as slapstick villains. This ironic celebration has introduced a new generation to the event. While some fear that humor dilutes the historical and agricultural context, others argue that it keeps the story alive, infusing it with modern meaning and satirical depth. There have been recurring calls and even announcements about a potential film adaptation of the Emu War. Whether as comedy, mockumentary, or dark satire, filmmakers have seen the potential in this almost too strange to be true tale. Such a project, if executed thoughtfully, could capture both the humor and the tragedy of the event. A dramatization could explore the psychological strain on farmers, the desperation of rural communities, and the absurdity of modern warfare clashing with wild instincts. It would be part farce, part fable. Today, emus are protected under various conservation laws in Australia. While still occasionally viewed as agricultural pests, they are more often seen as vital players in Australia's ecological tapestry. Programs exist to monitor their movement, breeding habits, and population health. The Emu War, in retrospect, marks a turning point. It was the beginning of a national conversation about living with nature, not against it. Though born from failure, it prompted new strategies in coexistence, including research into animal behavior, sustainable farming, and regional land management. The ethics of the Emu War, fighting animals with machine guns, seem grotesque in hindsight. Yet at the time, the line between pest control and military engagement was blurred by necessity and national identity. The ethical takeaway is not just about birds, but about how societies respond to crisis. Do we reach for the gun, or the microscope? Do we blame the other, or question our systems? The Emu War encourages future generations to favor understanding over aggression, knowledge over firepower. The Emu War is many things: a bizarre anecdote, a case study in strategic failure, a symbol of nature's strength, and a commentary on human folly. It reminds us that war is not always waged for glory, and that not all victories are noble. The emus won, but they were not combatants. They were simply creatures being themselves in a world reshaped by colonial ambition. Likewise, the soldiers were not villains. Major Meredith and his team followed orders with professionalism. The failure lay not in their effort, but in the assumptions behind the mission. The Emu War teaches us to plan with humility, to govern with wisdom, and to treat the land, and its creatures, with the respect earned over millennia. It is good that the Emu War is remembered with laughter. Humor allows history to breathe. It disarms our egos and opens space for reflection. But beneath the laughter should lie understanding, of the farmer's pain, of the bird's endurance, and of a government learning, too late, that sometimes, the gun is not the answer. In the end, the Emu War is not a story about birds defeating soldiers. It is a parable about what happens when the wild reminds the civilized that control is an illusion, and that nature, in its wisdom, will always have the last word. The Emu War of 1932 occupies a unique place in the world's historical tapestry, a curious collision of desperation and absurdity, power and humility, progress and resistance. It offers a cautionary tale wrapped in comedy, a tragedy softened by time and transformed into cultural treasure. At its heart, it is a human story. Of farmers struggling to survive. Of soldiers following orders. Of birds doing what they have always done. And of a country learning, painfully, that not every problem can be solved by force. Today, the emu continues to roam the Australian bush, proud, fast, unbothered. The fields have changed. The farmers have changed. But the birds remain. As if to say, we are still here. We always were. And we always will be.